Spotlight On is brought to you by Light, the technology platform reimagining e-commerce for live events. You can learn more about Light at light.com/partnerships. That is lyte.com/partnerships.
Hello and welcome to Spotlight On. I'm your host, Lawrence Purrier. This week, the spotlight shines on Jordy Freed. Jordy is head of partner marketing and strategy at Sony, where he works on their 360 reality audio product. A leader amongst the so-called immersive audio formats, 360 reality audio is a listening experience dramatically different from any other, including more traditional surround sound. The chief innovation is that the spatial audio effect is achieved through software, not hardware. As long as the playback service supports the format, as Amazon, Deezer, Tidal, and others do, all the listener needs is a pair of headphones. Jordy is Exhibit A for Spotlight On's thesis that there are many varying ways for people to make a life in the creative fields, not just on stage, on screen, or on mic. He also makes the case that who you know matters as much or more than what. I've known Jordy for just over 10 years through multiple roles, and our work together only gets bigger and more interesting as our conversation reveals. Enjoy. Morning. How are you?
How are you?
Good. How are you?
I love your recording studio.
So yeah, I was really like taking this, fabric piece seriously.
I like the noise deadening material there.
Yeah. So, we actually have one of these closets. So this is our closet.
Yeah, no,
could be a room we could sell it,
Yeah, I think it's a closet is also a home recording studio in New York. That's fair.
Basically. Yeah.
Well, before we jump in, congratulations on release day for the David Bowie 360 content.
Appreciate it. Yeah,
awesome.
Very exciting. Yeah, we made it.
We made it. We crossed the finish line.
Yep.
We'll come back to that though. So where are you based?
Based in Park Slope, Brooklyn.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you came there via Philadelphia?
Came there via Philly. I've been in New York. This is my 9th year in New York. So
you're almost
a New Yorker. Yeah.
What's your criteria?
My criteria is I own a car and I have to move it for street cleaning. So
okay, yeah.
So I think I'm a New Yorker enough, and I've gotten many parking tickets. So, I'm definitely a New Yorker. They've gotten my money. So
yeah, that's fair. Yeah, they've got a down payment on your soul.
Yes.
So for me, I think of Philadelphia. Whenever I talk to a music person, there's the obvious Philly soul connection, but it's also a great jazz town.
Yeah.
And is that the lineage you sort of grew up in? Like, can you talk a little bit about your Philadelphia and your Philadelphia music?
Yeah, that's a great question. Definitely jazz. And it really stemmed from my dad. He was always... So just to actually clarify, my dad's an audiophile. So I grew up with my father always into music, but also high quality music. So, years of buying SACDs and, getting a DVD player before anyone else, and, surround sound system. And when I was a kid, taking me to audio equipment stores, right? Just like dragging me. So, and ironically, this is kind of a tie-in to my career. I don't think I've ever met someone so passionate about Sony products as much as my dad, and Sony audio products in particular. And it's kind of full circle, so we'll get to that. But I guess back to your...
So he had music, like the ES line of stuff back in the day, like the...
Yeah, everything. I mean, they're literally, you turn left and right, and pretty much every consumer electronic we had was like a Sony product, right? Dream Machine, Walkman CD player, headphone, like everything, SACD, DVD, like it was just all over. But again, we'll get to that. But I guess back to the music piece.
When I was in fifth grade, I started an instrument like, a lot of kids do, and chose saxophone. And the first album I ever heard, like of jazz, was a Cannonball Adderley album. And I kind of got hooked, and my dad was really into jazz. And I basically got immersed into jazz as a kid back in middle school, like fifth grade, sixth grade. And, he would take me to jazz clubs, in Philly where you could sit in. And I was this like 11-year-old as a novelty, kind of like sitting in, I mean, there were a couple of jazz houses at the time, like one in West Philly, that this was before smoking indoors was illegal. And it was, I mean, my horn would smell like smoke for days afterwards, my clothes, I mean, and yeah, so he just got me hooked on jazz, and then I got hooked on jazz. And, I was really, really serious about jazz for many years. I mean, it defined a big chunk of my life at the time. And, I mean, I had my own band. We would play silent auctions and, banquet gigs and, all like community arts festivals and all that kind of stuff. Right. Oh. So jazz and music, I mean, I was like really locked in as a kid. And I mean, I would read Downbeat, Jazz Times. My dad would take me to see all the greats. I mean, first concert I ever saw, first music show I ever saw, true concert I ever saw, was Sonny Rollins.
That's some cred, man.
So, and that's a funny story too. I was a kid. I was sixth, seventh grade, right? And it was at the Kimmel Center in Philly. And the Kimmel Center has these two box seats, on the stage, left, stage right. At the end of the show, as Sonny was walking off, the artist passes one of the box seats. No one was sitting in it. And my dad's like, go run up, ask for an autograph, as he's walking off. And I did. I'm like, Mr. Rollins, will you please sign my program? And he said, come on back. So I hopped the railing, and I literally was just one-on-one with Sonny as like a, sixth or seventh grader. That was life-changing, honestly.
Yeah.
As like a young, fresh jazz saxophonist that, has no idea about the world or anything, but listens to these albums and hears this person play in that way. So yeah, I was completely hooked on jazz as a student. And one interesting note too, and then I'll shut up.
No.
So the high school I went to is actually a really interesting high school in suburban Philadelphia called Cheltenham High School. And there was a graduated, so in the 60s, a lot of people came from that high school in the world. So one graduating class was Reggie Jackson and Randy Brecker in the same graduating class.
Wow.
And then 2 years later was Michael Brecker and Benjamin Netanyahu. Yeah. So in the 60s, this high school was like the hot thing. But I guess the point is the Brecker brothers came from this high school. Jeff Lorber came from this high school. Andy Snitzer came from this high school. All these, like, it's kind of a weird high school that had some jazz people.
Was it a performing arts school, or it just happened to be a thing? Yeah.
Just happened to be a thing. I guess, suburban Philadelphia, very, very diverse community of all backgrounds, right? And I guess arts, was valued at that time. But yeah, so growing up as a high schooler or in that township, with folks like, the Brecker brothers and other people coming from that place that I was walking the halls of, was definitely influential, and actually started corresponding with Michael Brecker via email when I was a high school student before he died.
Hmm.
And know his sister and his kids and his family. So yeah, you're talking to a jazz head, basically.
Yeah. Well, all right. Let's talk about that for a minute. So, your experience with Sonny Rollins and being a kid going to shows resonates with me. Not because of my experience, but when I was still living in New York. So my son plays piano, and I would take him to go to shows all the time at the Blue Note, and we'd go see McCoy Tyner, 2 or 3 times a year. And the band always loved seeing a little kid in the audience. And he had very similar experiences where the band would come talk to him between sets, or after the show, they'd say, "Oh, come sit and talk." And, we have little doodles they made for him. Francisco Miller, the drummer especially, was always really into talking to him. And I think, that first of all, it's an incredibly generous and warm thing for the players to do. But I've always thought about that in terms of it must really be for a form that went through a period where it was sort of endangered. It's much more vibrant now, I think, but there was that period of time where it wasn't clear where jazz was going, or if it was going to really be anything other than a very niche genre. It had to be very exciting to see a young kid at those shows, and a kid not being dragged there, like a kid actually digging it,
Totally. It's special. And I mean, honestly, I guess as an art form, it's in a unique place to value that versus maybe other genres, to be honest, whereas like a pop star, no disrespect to pop stars, but maybe it's a little bit different. It's more intimate. There isn't necessarily scale, for better or for worse, right? In terms of playing to 20,000 people, for a jazz artist. So, and I guess there's a history of lineage of, generational. It's generational, right? Yeah, there's always kind of the next generation and passing on legacy, keeping the art alive. That makes jazz kind of unique, right?
Yeah, that's actually interesting too. I wonder, I'm not enough of a musicologist to really unpack that, but it strikes me as it's a both the African American lineage and the Jewish American lineage, both having strong storytelling, narrative based traditions and oral traditions, story
community.
Yeah,
very community. It's about community. And, I'm part of that Jewish American lineage. So yeah, it makes sense. I think what you're saying makes total sense. Yeah.
So it's also interesting to me that sort of Cannonball was the first guy that you latched onto or that you heard, because that also strikes me as as a kid, big, bold, attract, it's not esoteric.
Yep.
But also a really good gateway drug because, there's a sophistication. Cannonball is the way in, takes you in a lot of interesting directions.
Yeah.
Could you speak to that at all? Where did you go from Cannonball? And is he your guy? What's your pantheon?
He's not my guy now. No disrespect to Cannonball. I haven't listened to Cannonball in a really long time. He was a gateway drug. Honestly, right after that, it's a little bit fuzzy, but for me, the big thing was, I think actually, no, I do know where I went next. Stan Getz and Coltrane, but particularly Stan Getz, Getz and Gilberto. So my dad really pushed me. And I started doing these talent shows, talent contests in the region, where I would basically play to track what the saxophonist was doing. And I had a really great ear, and I couldn't read very well at all from a music perspective, sheet music perspective. But I could literally hear something and almost play it back without much challenge. So I would hear these solos if it wasn't too technically complicated. I wasn't doing Love Supreme, but Getz and Gilberto, Coltrane, My One and Only Love with Johnny Hartman. I would play to track honestly. And then from there, it just kind of like gradually, grew into like Herbie and more modern stuff like, Joshua Redman, Branford, Marsalis. Yeah. And that kind of took me into high school. Right. And then I really started getting into fusion, like discovered Pat Metheny in high school through an album at the library that I took out, a CD at the library. Funny, right?
That's so awesome.
Yeah, like, and other fusion like Steps Ahead, my high school had an EWI, believe it or not, so I was playing like EWI in high school. Yeah, I really went down the rabbit hole. And yeah, I was doing other stuff too, but music was kind of always the core, right?
Was it a path of self-exploration at that point? Or did you have like, was there the person that was feeding you stuff?
It became self-exploration. I struggled with ADHD. I was a little bit lazy at times, motivation, wasn't disciplined. Before music, I actually did 8 years of Kempo karate, where I got my black belt from age 3 to 11.
Wow.
And my dad realized that I'm a hyperactive kid. I am lazy at times. I need discipline. I had self-esteem issues, and karate was kind of first way to channel that. And then music became that. And I just so happened to have an ear, and it centered me in a lot of ways. Now he also pushed me too, but like, for someone with ADHD and, the potential to have gotten lost without the right kind of construction, that really focused me. And it was something I understood and was passionate about. And I mean, honestly, without that, who knows where I'd be today?
Yeah.
I might have gotten lost,
Yeah, those are the years too, like 5th grade to 8th grade, like especially going into middle school. Like those are the years where we lose a lot of kids. They're not babied the way they are in elementary school, and there's not like the big infrastructure a high school has. It's a tough time. And it just sucks. It's an awful age.
Yeah.
Did your dad play? Was he a player, or was he a stage dad? Is that why he was pushing you?
He was a total stage dad. I mean, he would write like, I actually did press in like high school. I did these benefit concerts where the whole community would come, like benefit concert for, when Michael Brecker died, benefit for Crohn's colitis, foundation, which is another thing, part of my family history. And, he would send out press releases and like all this stuff. He was a total stage dad. He, like when I was a kid too, he would take me to nursing homes on like Sundays to play for the elderly. And, his thing is, okay, it's a mitzvah, good deed in Judaism. And it's also a way for you to practice.
Yeah. What was his day job?
He's a structural engineer. So, designing steel structures, support for bridges, things like that. He's always been an engineer for his whole career. Yeah.
So you're playing through high school.
Yeah.
What's that start to look like as you get to college age? Are you thinking like, man, I'm going to play? Like, I'm assuming we get to the point where there's the crossroad where you say, I'm not going to be the next Stan Getz. Therefore, I'm going to pivot. But how long did you carry the flame?
I dropped it. Okay. So I kept playing into college at the beginning, but so I even though music was my core, I actually went through a phase in high school where I did really well. I was really focused on academics, and I was the editor of the school newspaper, things like that, right? And I entered college as a poli-sci major. I was really into politics as well, just as a fascination, interested in government. And I think to your point, in terms of that dropping point or pivot, I was always really, really fearful of, for the way that I would be comfortable, right? the unknown of becoming a performer, and also self-discipline, and also just really being honest with myself in terms of, yeah, I'm good for like my community, but I mean, what does it mean to be a professional musician? What does it mean to be a world-class professional musician? If I'm going to do this, I would want to play with, you know, Chicoria and this person, that one person, and that would never happen. I was just very real, like, that's not going to happen. So, you know, and I think also too, I was getting burnt out. I was like, again, had kind of a dad that really pushed me, and I don't say that negatively. I needed it at that time, and my father and I have a really great relationship, and I'm grateful that he saw my deficiencies and channeled them, right? But I you know, I was tired. So I entered as a poli-sci major. That lasted one semester. And, and this is where it gets really interesting. You know, I didn't have, like, I was supported as a kid, you know, I'd support, you know, middle to upper middle class. You know, we weren't poor, we weren't wealthy, kind of just in the middle. But something dawned on me saying like, oh, well, I'm going to have to pay for stuff in the future. I'm going to have to pay for college. I wanted to go to an Ivy League school. I think I was like deferred or waitlisted at one or two. I ultimately decided to go to Temple University. Really, I don't think I was ready to leave Philly at that time. And also I was thinking budget, like, oh, an education's an education. It's what I make of it afterwards. So at least for undergrad, I'm just, you know, I'm going to do this. It's a solid school. But I realized, like, in my first semester of my freshman year, I was just going to class and doing extremely well. And I had a lot of free time. And I was like, I need to get my own job. I need to make my own money, and I need to get ahead in my career. And I was going through some personal things within that first semester. And later, towards the end of that calendar year, end of 2008, I was like, you know what? I'm going to start my career now. I want to work in the music business. I don't know what it means. I want to work in music. I don't want to be a performer. So I'm sure there's like a business side of this thing that we call music. And I want to lean into that and explore that. So I started January 2009. I was second semester, freshman year, 18 years old. And that's when I started my career. So I first started with kind of two things. Started on air. They put me on air at WRTI, like the jazz station in Philly, not a student station, like the jazz station. The GM of the station had seen me play and was like, you know, jazz, you can be on air. You don't need to like do data entry. So I did like 2 months of shadowing board ops and things like that. And then I did 3 a.m. to 6 a.m. shifts,
Nice.
also 12 to 6 a.m. shifts, and sometimes 12 to 3 as an 18-year-old.
By the way, that's like, you made it. That's the pinnacle. Like, those are the jazz hours. That's when you want to be playing jazz.
Yeah. So all the people in nursing homes would call during that time.
Prisoners.
Like, yeah. And in parallel, something really interesting happened. I was Googling and researching all these companies that worked with some of my favorite artists. And I came across a couple companies, came across one company in Boston. It was an interesting story. I'll get to that later if we have time. And then I found one company that happened to be right outside of the city in a little town called Ballackinwood, where my grandparents lived. And also I looked at the address and it was down the street from where my parents got married.
Oh, wow.
And so I sent them a cold email, like, I know this jazz musician, that jazz musician, I've done this, that, blah, blah, blah. Emailed everyone in the firm, very small firm. No one got back to me except for one person. And they said, oh, just come on in. You know, we don't have an internship, but like, come in, like, you know. So I took the train, like a regional rail, walked in a snowstorm to get to this place for an internship that didn't exist. Like January 15, 2009, 5 days before, I guess, Obama was inaugurated. And I was like, I want to work for you guys. This firm, DL Media, represented Blue Note Records for 20 years and a bunch of other very well-known jazz musicians. And for me at the time, that was creme de la creme. And it was supposed to be a summer internship, right? And this was January. And I said, well, I want to start now to prepare for the summer. So I started February 27, 2009.
Wow.
And I stayed there for almost 5 years from that date. And I basically worked there full time and went to school full time for my undergrad as a publicist. So when you and I were communicating years ago, like back in 2011, I was still an undergrad.
Yeah, I had no idea.
Yeah.
It's just, I'm just doing the math now on it all. That's incredible.
Yeah.
Incredible.
Yeah. So
damn overachiever.
No, I felt like I needed to because I didn't have family help. You know, I felt like I needed to. And I did get a little bit lucky because, you know, the firm at the time stopped consulting Blue Note Records based on the EMI acquisition. And, you know, they were kind of going through their next phase after 20 years of working with Blue Note, which obviously, you know, financially, I'm sure was a big piece at the time. I mean, the firm's still running and doing great now. I'm still, you know, I keep in touch with the owner, my old boss. 3 publicists that had been there for like 10 to 20 years each, they all left within a year of my coming as an intern for personal reasons, right? It was a tumultuous time, still 2009, recession, all of that. And then the owner took a second job running a festival in Portland, Oregon. So he was commuting back and forth. And I was kind of the last guy standing.
Wow.
And ironically, as a, you know, editor of school paper and someone who was really comfortable, you know, talking to people and writing and performing, if you will, and I say that with quotes, being a publicist was really natural.
Yeah, sure.
For that skill set and my personality. And it just, within a semester, I shifted to become a comms major. Yeah. So I got my degree in communications while I was working as a publicist.
All right. So there's probably about, I don't know, 5 or 8 years that that will lead us up until the Sony role. And but I want to sort of condense them in the form of the question of, we got you from the creative to the business. How did you get from the comms part of the business to the true business part of the business? Like what's that evolution for you? And what was the attraction in that? Because I would imagine from what you're saying, you probably could have had a really successful career as a publicist or solely in marketing. Like, what's that evolution and what was attractive to you in that?
It's a great question. And I know exactly the answer because I can pinpoint it. Towards the latter part of my time at that firm, PR was becoming more challenging with digital transformation, outlets obviously going away, things consolidating online. And I was really interested in impact, right? Like, you know, for certain big hits as a publicist at the time, an NPR, all things considered review, that would drive sales, right? I was interested in correlation of my work to impact and measurement and delivering value to who I was working with. And that was becoming increasingly challenging at that time as a traditional publicist. So I was viewing comms as kind of more a piece of broader marketing from a direct to consumer perspective. And it basically led me to marketing is something that, you know, at the end of the day, as a marketer, there are elements of performance marketing, but you're still telling a story to drive that performance. So my roots in comms really serves me even to this day to tell stories, even in developing business partnerships, right? And in parallel, through relationships and, you know, people that I got to know, I came on to Blue Note Entertainment Group as director of marketing and publicity. It was my first marketing role, true marketing role for an organization that, you know, is an actual consumer facing brand, well known. Yeah, I still had my PR hat too, but I was thrown in on the marketing side and I wanted it. And I basically got my marketing chops at Blue Note. But through a series of events, it just kind of snowballed into this weird, or very not weird, but strategic fusion of marketing, business development, and comms kind of combined into one, and how they all kind of relate to each other, right? Part of that was I did leave Blue Note to work outside of music for a period of time at Gray Advertising. I was doing PR for the National Park Service, Canon, big brands, big companies, and I was on an integrated marketing team. And that was the first time I really saw the power of, integrated marketing campaigns at work, and where partnerships come into play. And I ultimately didn't stay there that long, but I decided to go back to Blue Note because I had a vision for how to flex that brand through strategic marketing, but also driving, business opportunities through that. And really, like, there were certain cases where it's like, okay, how do I market the brand? How do I get press for the brand? Well, I need to create X, Y, and Z partnerships for that from a strategic marketing perspective. But those marketing partnerships actually had business upside too.
Right.
So
right.
all of it kind of combined into like this weird mutt of, integrated marketing, business development, and comms.
Yeah. How aware are you in the moment when you have a gig, of what you want out of it in terms of your next thing? Or are you just fully in the moment and living that like, are you one of these people that has an aspirational career plan, or are you more opportunistic? How do you think about that?
The role I'm in, honestly, I maybe didn't identify Sony in particular. But it was a 5-year plan to get to where I'm at, an actual plan, to be totally honest with you. When I went back to Blue Note, I had a vision for what I wanted to do that could help the brand. My dream was to work for a big brand that was well known in a marketing role. And I was going to create the proof of concept for building that true portfolio that would help that company, and also, give me the experience and develop my background to get me there. And every deal that I made and every partnership we had during that 4-year return at Blue Note from 2016 to 2020, it's kind of leading up to this role. And literally, the biggest partnership of that time led me to this job at Sony. And
are you in the midst of another 5-year plan now? Like, do you have a vision for what's next, or are you like, I'm going to do this for as long as the ride lasts?
It's a little bit murkier, to be totally honest. COVID has complicated that. Really enjoying what I'm doing. Not that I didn't before, but I mean, it's a truly unique company. It's a special company. I have a lot of affinity for the company I work for now, because it's been a brand that's meant a lot to me at various points over the years. And I mean, even within my company, there's just so many things going on because it's such a diverse company. We have the second largest label in the world. We have one of the largest gaming companies in the world. We have a major studio. We have electronics business. We have B2B businesses. We have, ventures in, the automotive space that are obviously very public. So I'm not saying anything, confidential. So, and it's kind of, thrived in recent years, and, Sony's been around a long time. And so, I mean, I honestly don't know for sure what the future will hold. I sometimes think I know. The goal is to be a CMO one day somewhere, whether it's Sony or somewhere else. And I'm still a relatively young guy.
Yes, you
So,
are, you whippersnapper. Well,
so
it's something you just said though that resonates for me is the not only about the prestige brand, but the age of the company. You know, when I went to Warner Music, I never aspired to work at a record label group, even though I was around music and technology my whole life. But Warner in particular meant a lot to me, like as a music fan and as a music nerd and sort of like, you know, a student, I guess, of the modern music business. What Warner meant in terms of artist development and that era where Warner was the place where artists wanted to be, right? Like they knew that if you signed to Warner, you might have had a 10-year run to just get your career up, and they'd let you make 5 albums or whatever it was. That meant a lot to me. But it also, as somebody who came out of like small companies and startups and things that were bought or consolidated, I look at my resume and it's like, man, there's no evidence of any of the things I did. All those companies are gone. Bought, merged, whatever. And the idea that I could go somewhere that, you know, if you include Warner Chappell, it's a 200-year-old company. The idea I could go somewhere and just have a little bit of impact in that bigger mosaic was really appealing to me. So I sort of get that impulse to sort of play on that stage and to be part of that canvas. But I would love to, if we could now, pivot a little bit more to the specifics of what you're doing.
Yeah.
And dig into the technology a little bit.
Yeah.
And where I wanted to start was, could you tell me a little bit about the genesis of the immersive or spatial audio space in general? Because for me as a business person and even as a consumer, I wasn't watching it emerge, and it seemed like it was just there one day fully formed. So could you talk a little bit about, like, what is this space and where did it come from?
For sure. It's a great question, right? And we're so in the moment usually that the genesis can be overlooked. So for context, I am an employee of Sony Corporation of America in a kind of partner marketing and strategy role to develop brand and business development. But I work, I mean, basically our team in the US is an extension of the Tokyo sound team. So it's a division within Sony Electronics Corporation that focuses on sound technologies. And for context, this organization, this team, right, can be traced back to the Walkman, right? And then everything since. So when there are new audio formats or standards, right, it's often coming from this team. Mini disc, right? You know, SACD. This team was responsible for SACD. DAT player. That's true.
I keep one on my desk.
DAT Walkman. Okay. Wow. Okay. There you go. So there's a lot of history with this particular part of the company. It's one of the oldest parts of the company, to be honest, and one of the more iconic parts. And so a lot of the work that was done in the past was around conceiving new ways to experience music, whether it's through hardware or, you know, ways of listening, SACD being one of them. But, you know, the emphasis at the end of the day was either higher quality, more efficiency, or bringing you closer to the music in some way. And that's taken on different shapes or forms. I guess when you talk about this new product that we are focused on, 360 reality audio, I mean, it is an immersive music experience, right? You know, I guess you put it under the spatial audio bucket, spatial audio being kind of a generic term for, you know, feeling or listening to music in space. It's really an outgrowth of other surround formats, right? So if 5.1 was a standard, right, for surround listening or surround music, this is 5.1 on a lot of steroids and for the streaming age. And I guess what's really interesting about 360 reality audio is, you know, I mean, other formats have been launched to more or less fanfare from various parties over the years. The very unique circumstance we have now is we're living in a streaming and digital world where it's not always device specific, right?
Yeah.
So the beauty of 360 compared to maybe some of the prior ventures in elements of, sound transformation from a format perspective is, I mean, as long as the content is mixed in 360 and the streaming platform supports 360, you can actually experience 360 with any pair of headphones or any device generally, right? I put an asterisk there because there are certain limitations, but the core, mobile user on a smartphone in any pair of headphones, if the content's mixed and the streaming service supports it, you can listen to 360 content. And for context too, 360, just to dive in a little bit deeper to what it is, we've been listening to music in a primary format, for mass market for 40 years, and that's stereo, right? Yeah. We went from mono to stereo, right? We just talked about, there were forays into stereo to 5.1, right? Wasn't adopted as a mass standard, maybe partially because of device requirements and things like that. Yeah. Now we're really going stereo to immersive, spatial, and 360 is, at the forefront of that. And the music experience puts the listener at the center of a sphere, and they're going to hear individual sound objects in various locations of that sphere from a mixing perspective. And it's really created through mixing after a recording is complete. And the idea is you really feel like you're transported. It transports you. You feel like you're with the artist in the studio. There's clarity in a mix. There's a sense of losing yourself in the music in a way that really can't be achieved from a technical perspective with stereo. You might be lost in the music from a creative standpoint, and that's totally great on stereo. But 360, yeah, you can have that kind of creative emotional connection, but also like through the actual technical delivery, you're going to literally feel that in certain cases. Yeah.
Well, there's a couple of things that are interesting in there. And I'm going to say some of it back to you just so it doesn't get lost on our listeners.
Sure, please.
So in one of our conversations over the last couple of months, I was trying to explain the 360 sort of capability to somebody. And when I said it to you, you said, oh, yes, that's exactly it, which was, I think about it in terms of like good, better, best. And there's sort of headphones, good. 360 sort of compatible, like the Sony headphones, or I don't know if there's similar headphones, but like headphones that are designed to work with the format better. And then probably out of reach for most people, but the installation that your team designed at the David Bowie pop-up location, sort of best, like an array of speakers, each sort of spatial component has its own output. Like that to me actually undermines the opportunity a little bit, because what you said before is the innovation, which is 5.1, I can't carry it around with me. 7.1, I can't carry around with me. But this experience is really the opportunity in immersive music because it can come with me. And that's super exciting, as a listener, as a business person, I think about albums that I just can't wait to hear in this format. I think about records that sounded so great, even in the stereo sound stage on a great playback system where you could see where the music's coming from. But you talked about the mixing component of it. And, a week or so ago, we had Tony Visconti in that event we did together. And when I was talking to him offline, I was asking him about the mixing process and if he enjoyed it and if he thought it was interesting. Because I really wanted to understand from like a technical, Tony's not necessarily an engineer, but he's been in studios for 60 years. Like ultimately there's a gearhead component to what he does. And he lit up and he was like, oh yeah, he's like, it was incredibly fun. And he described what you showed me in the software, the sphere, and where you could place things. And he started talking about, I placed David's vocal here and I could bring it into the front and I could put the harmonies here. And you could see how the tools were not cumbersome limitations he had to get around to make these mixes. It seemed like, and clearly I'm not speaking for Tony Visconti, but it seemed like the way he lit up, that it was actually fun to work in the environment. Yeah. And I wonder, as a hardware software development process, like how did your product team, if you can speak to that, how did your product team get to that? Like, how did they make something that, I open up some digital workstation tools and it's like, oh God, I have to learn how to do this. Like you have to dig into the tool, right? It's like, it's not easy. It's not fun. And you actually don't use all the capabilities because it's like, I just want to do the things I need to do. Please stop adding features, do you have any insight into that part of the process?
I can't say that. I can't speak to the tangible motivation, but I can speculate in a way that I think the team would agree and support. At the end of the day, we're working with creators. This is supposed to be a creative opportunity, creative venture. Yeah, there's a business element, but at the end of the day, if 360 mixes are done by engineers, those engineers are creatives themselves, right? And we're working with music. That's creative too. And with more canvas to mix in a sphere, there's more creative options as well. So when we think about this holistically, from a motivation perspective in terms of ease of use for a creator, right? It's really to that point, it's a creative tool more than anything else. So when you think about the essence of what it takes to create a great 360 mix or a 360 mix in general, there's a lot of tacticals that go into the software and, other elements to optimize a mix. But in essence, not to oversimplify, you're taking sound objects, right? Because it's object-based audio. You're placing them in different locations of a sphere, right? In which the listener is at the center. And when you think about that mixing process from a visual representation standpoint, it's actually fairly simple, right? So when you take into account like what our value proposition is to the creator community, the music industry, and like what this format's all about, it doesn't need to be complicated. Yeah, there are other elements that, I can't oversimplify because, it's still a plugin tool. It's still software, right? And, nothing operates seamlessly ever. Not to say that there are bugs, but you'll have that with any computer program you're running where Outlook crashes or Teams crashes or right. But in essence, like the actual core of a mixing experience, right? It doesn't need to be complicated. And, we want it to be accessible and turnkey so that creators can actually focus on creation.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things that struck me about Tony's comments was he said, well, let me back up. One of the things that struck me overall is how fast sort of the output came together for a lot of the content. And so just to provide 15 seconds of context for our listeners, you and I have recently worked on a project where a big chunk of David Bowie's later career catalog, last 20 years worth of albums, were mixed in Sony 360 reality audio, overseen by the original producer of the albums, Tony Visconti. So with that said, now people know what the hell we're talking about.
Exactly.
And it happened very quickly. And one of the things that Tony related was that the time spent assembling the stems made the mixing go much faster. And then after exploring that a little bit with him, what occurred to me was it really benefits from having, it's not just anybody mixing the albums, it's somebody familiar with the content. Because to your point, because you have this broader palette, if you're familiar with the music and you're familiar with the source material, it's very easy to have a vision for where it all should go. And it's sort of intuitive in a way, like, oh yeah, of course I want this vocal right in my face and I want these other things there. And it's almost like it's fulfilling things that a mixer or a producer, it's probably how they heard the music when they were doing the initial mix. They were just stuck in a flat environment. So it's really interesting in that regard. I wonder, could you talk a little bit about, and I don't mean in a proprietary way, but what's the future for these formats? Like it's very much music focused now. But I could see a world where like it would be super fun to do podcasts this way, especially if you had like a panel of people or does this have theatrical applications, or will I go into a music venue someday and experience a concert in this format? Like how big is the canvas that this capability can exist on?
It's a great question. So we right now are very committed to the music industry. We're deep in music. We've worked with tons of creators. We're working with labels, streaming services, and music is a key focus. I'd say an evolution that I can definitely speak to in this podcast is our work with live audio and video content. So from a streaming service perspective, yes, today we're talking on January 21st, 5 David Bowie catalog albums have been released in 360 reality audio
today
on streaming services. Yes, congratulations, thank you.
Same to you.
From an audio streaming perspective, but it doesn't just stop at audio. So, for example, as you know, in our wonderful collaboration on Bowie 75, in these pop-up locations, we were screening audio video content in 360 reality audio of a reality tour live, right? David Bowie 2004. And during our CES activity, Consumer Electronics Show, biggest consumer electronics conference in the world, it takes place at the top of January. We did a digital activation with the Bowie team and on live streaming that some of that same content, concert footage through YouTube, right? Audio, video. So, I mean, I can definitely tangibly speak to the application for audio, video content. We've had pre-recorded. There's certain activities we've done with various artists from a VOD, video on demand perspective. And we demonstrated the live stream capability of a playback in real time through YouTube as well, with simulated 360 reality audio. So, I mean, that's an initial natural evolution that is definitely of interest to us, and artists are interested as well. Beyond that, I mean, the sky's the limit.
Yeah. Is there a true live application, or I think of an experience like walking through an exhibition, and they often give you the headphones. That's just an engineering choice, right? That's not at this point, you've unleashed the technology. If I'm a creator making an audio product and I choose to mix it that way, that's just an application of an existing technology, right? You don't need to do anything new because it's not hardware based.
Yes, I guess it depends on the experience overall, right? So, for example, is that creative experience looking to have a call and response or dynamic, versus just pre-recorded playback, right? That's one piece of it. Are they trying to do true live? What's the delivery mechanism? There are a lot of factors that need to come into play, but in essence, yeah, I mean, one great example, right? you probably don't even know this. I haven't shared. At Sony
out.
Hall. What?
I said you're holding out.
Yeah, a little bit. We are doing something very interesting at Sony Hall. So Sony Hall is a branded music venue that is owned and operated by Blue Note Entertainment Group, my old company, in Times Square. And it's a sponsorship partnership with Sony Corporation, our parent company from the brand marketing team. And there's actually an activation coming up this spring, 2022, of guided meditation in 360 reality audio at Sony Hall, because Sony Hall actually supports 360 reality audio playback from their house system, not just headphones. They have speakers that are configured to play back 360 content. So we didn't, but one of the internal organizations within Sony actually worked with Blue Note to identify, an artist who has this kind of unique yoga and meditation experience, and they mixed that content in 360, and it will be a 360 reality audio meditation experience, which is cool. And so that, you can draw your own conclusions in terms of, where the applications might be, but that's another perfect example. I mean, we haven't done that every day. It's not a traditional music activation or experience or piece of content. But I guess, to your point, and this is public knowledge too. I mean, you can Google this activation. We're starting to see certain creators have visions in mind, for usage.
Yep. I'm sure. All right. Well, listen, we're nearing the end of our time,
yes.
But what I would like to ask is that maybe we throw the stone down the road and get back together in a few months or later this year and see what the state is of this technology and the deployment and the adoption and what's next in the roadmap as you start to unveil things. Because like I said, it was a space that was a little bit of a blind spot to me, but now that I'm going to use the pun, dude. Now that I'm immersed in it, I find it so intriguing. So I'd love to just stay in touch and check in with you later and see what's going on. But thank you so much. Did we cover everything you needed to cover?
I think so.
Good.
I think so. This is good. What do you think? How do you feel about everything? I know I spent like half the time in therapy session talking about my childhood.
Well, that's what we do here, though. I mean, like, the meta theme of this podcast is people who make their living in the creative fields who aren't just necessarily on that side of the screen or the stage or the microphone, because there's lots of ways to have a career and a livelihood in entertainment and the arts. So I think we covered both bases.
Yeah.
I think so. Thank you.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jordy Freed and the entire team at Sony 360 Reality Audio. Thank you, Aunt Taylor and the team at Light. And as always, thank you for listening to Spotlight On. Get and share all of our past episodes, write a review, and even send us a message through our website, spotlightonpodcast.com. If you like what we're up to here, please leave us a review on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts from. Join us again next week, and in the meantime, be safe and stay in touch.